Hello, welcome to Zero Hanger TV for our latest edition of our 2024 Trade Targets series. And to cover Essendon's potential trade targets for the off-season is Zero Hanger writer Frank Seal. Frank, how are you, mate?
Good, thanks, Mitch. How are you?
I'm good. Glad you're having your ZHTV debut today. And we're going to be covering the Bombers, a team often busy come the off-season, as we certainly saw last year and even some of the seasons prior. But I guess looking at their list, and a list that's currently in premiership contention, is there any, standout list needs or targets, that we could expect the Bombers, or an area, we can expect the Bombers to consider in the off-season?
They don't want for much anymore, the Bombers. They've got very newfound midfield depth and balance, obviously led by Zach Merritt. They've got Sam Durham, they've got Jai Caldwell, Archie Perkins. It leaves some selection headaches with Darcy Parish to come back. Maybe he won't even fit in. They've got Ben Mackay, who's finally thriving in a winning environment in defence. Adding Jordan Ridley back to that makes them pretty formidable down there, especially with the Mason Redman and Nick Martin and Andy McGrath running off the half-back line as well. Up forward, they've got Peter Wright, very good frontman. Nate Caddy could be the future up there, and Harrison Jones is obviously still developing, pretty good aerial and at ground level. If anything, small forwards, they're not even really in demand because they got Matt Guelphy, they got Jade Gresham, they got Ben Hobbs who can all roll down there. But there are some names, some small forwards who could potentially add some flair in the Bombers forward line. Yeah,
that's the area that we've kind of focused on for the Bombers, as you've kind of discussed well, that they're pretty well covered. Their ruck mix has always been interesting, but I think they're back to Sam Draper in for the long term, and Nick Bryan as well is still developing well. They've got Todd Goldstein there, so like you said, very well covered across the playing list. So let's jump into our list of names. We've got 5 to consider, and all very similar in the role that they'll play. Obviously, some offer certain strengths over others. But yeah, it is that kind of maybe half forward, small forward role. So as you mentioned, Matt Guelphy has been pretty solid over the last month, but usually you want 2 or 3. You look at Geelong, you look at Brad Close, Grind Myers, Tyson Stengle, Ollie Dempsey, and how well that can work for them. And maybe Essendon want to kind of add to those half forward, small forward ranks. On top of Guelphy, as you mentioned, Hobbs and Gresham can play those kind of roles. John Menzies now floated into defence a little bit, so maybe there is a spot there for them to consider. The first name off the bat is one who would be somewhat of a risk, but certainly probably not from a salary cap or trade perspective, and more just from a health perspective. And that's Jack Martin, off contract at Carlton, hasn't really been able to break in this year, and while probably still a wanted player for the Blues beyond this season, the likes of Matt Owes, Jesse Motlop, Corey Durden, and now Zach Williams could maybe be ahead of him in the pecking order, and it certainly could open up a move maybe for the Bombers to consider.
Yep, Jack Martin provides a good aerial and ground level presence, can work up and down the ground, good runner. Kicks goals in big games, kicked 2 in the elimination final against Sydney and in the prelim final against Brisbane, and was suspended for the semi-final against Melbourne. So maybe that brings up a bit of a discipline issue that could be a worry. Obviously a risk with injury as well, with a pretty rough history, but definitely want to consider there.
Yeah, high upside, which is what we saw at Gold Coast. Maybe more of a midfield talent, but a formidable forward for sure. And like you mentioned, his soft tissue injury history is a concern. But if they can kind of back in their performance team and get the best out of Jack Martin, who wouldn't cost much, just given the Blues might not put up much of a fight if they're looking at other targets themselves. And from a salary perspective, you're probably not coughing up overs at all for someone like Jack Martin. So there's some caveats that come with any move for Jack Martin, but I think he'd be a great fit for Essendon if it all lined up, and that is a big if in a way. Another one we've already kind of mentioned in the same vein when we're talking about top small forwards, and Tyson Stengle. Now this is one that out of the 5 moves would be the big money one, and that Essendon in a way have been able to maneuver in recent years, whether that's through front-ending, back-ending contracts for their top players. We saw Jordan Ridley add a few more seasons on, and that probably gave him some flexibility. Ben Mackay set to be heavily front-ended in his first couple of seasons before, earning probably below the average. So there's got to be a few maneuvers that would open up a move for Tyson Stengle, but we know that Essendon have been linked to him and a free agent, so they won't have to cough up any trade capital, given he's unrestricted. And that also usually means that clubs are probably happy to pay a little bit more in salary cap space, just because they don't have to shift any of their draft picks or a player to attain him. So Stengle, probably a pretty good fit, and ideally, maybe the perfect trade target for them.
He's arguably the best small forward in the game at the moment. Would provide a nightmare matchup up forward, which none of the small forwards at Essendon really do at the moment. They're more sort of the pressure players, maybe more defensive minded, especially Guelphy. Potentially wants out of Geelong, we know that. Well, that's still sort of speculated. Offers probably need to be upwards of 700,000 to sort of lure him in. There's rumours with St Kilda that have swirled recently, but if he wants a chance at another big club, Essendon's probably the way to go.
Yeah, for sure. And particularly when you look at premiership contention for those three clubs, Cat's probably falling off and joining St Kilda, and then Essendon are really on the up. So if it's premierships, it's going to be hard to go by, but he already has one, and it could be the monetary side of things. Chad Wingard, another one, very similar to Jack Martin. Injury history is a concern, but I think what you might get in experience and in potential for what would be a cheap acquisition might be one for the Bombers to look at if they want a half forward. Obviously, his place in the Hawks side, albeit not playing with injury, but even when fit, playing behind Jack Ginnivan, Dylan Moore, probably Luke Bruce still, and then you add Nick Watson into the equation, it makes it quite hard to see how Chad Wingard's going to be playing. We know that delisted last year with a plan to be retained from the Hawks, and he was, but there was obviously some interest from Collingwood that was considered from Wingard's party. So very much could be a similar move. A free agent again this year wouldn't cost Essendon anything and would bring some nice experience and potential upside. Yep,
clearly an injury risk, but at his best can almost match Stengle with the sort of flair and the nightmare matchup that he would bring. He's out of contract at the end of the year, obviously a risk. Will be 31 years old as well, so maybe not the ideal option, but definitely could be worth something if he's doesn't cost too much either. So,
well, yeah, I guess you look at Todd Goldstein. Yeah. They might not have had him, or they very well could have had him in plans to start round one, but they probably weren't expecting to get as much out of him as they had over those first 10 rounds. And if they can get something like that out of Wingard, might be a big plus. Probably one of the lesser known names, but certainly I think if you're a Pies fan, you would have loved what you've seen from Joe Richards this year. And he is the fourth name on our trade targets list for the Bombers, and that's probably because, very similar to Wingard, maybe similar to Martin, is that there are a lot of players ahead of him in the senior side for those small forward roles at Collingwood. You talk about McCreary, Elliott, Hill, Schultz has come in as well, and it's might make it very hard for him to break back into the team once he returns from injury, which could be as early as this week. And if the opportunities aren't there for someone like Joe Richards with the upside he's seen, there certainly would be interest, and Essendon probably might be one of those clubs.
Yep, would definitely add some depth and potential more than anything. He's 24 years old. He's relatively untried and seemingly in favour at Collingwood, even though they've got a lot of depth there. But as you say, if he falls out of favour, if the chances start diminishing, then it could be a chance at Essendon as well, of course.
And last on our list, probably a bit of a different one, but off contract, just like the other four on our list. Riley Garcia, maybe in a similar position to Richards in where he might sit in the senior side. I think he found some great form in that midfield forward role when he got run through the middle, and then was able to move forward for the Bulldogs this year. Some good pressure, some good ball winning skills, and some good, I guess, just forward half impact. But recently dropped to the VFL with some areas to work on his game, noted by Luke Beveridge. So off contract and maybe probably the cheapest option out of the five on our list if the Bombers are keen to add some small forward depth.
Yeah, same again. Brings some potential, some forward depth. They're both, Richards and Garcia, both pretty versatile. Could potentially roll through the midfield with a bit more development. They won't impact premiership credentials straight away at least, but definitely one to consider.
That wraps up our trade targets edition for Essendon. You can catch our next episode, where we'll be covering Fremantle. And you can also catch all the latest news and views on zerohanger.com.au.